Hello my friends and fellow lore nerds, and welcome back. Today we're not covering a character in the upcoming Warlords of Draenor expansion, but instead we're examining the material that connects Mists of Pandaria to the Warlords of Draenor expansion. As Blizzard has done with the last two expansions, the novel has been written to update the lore following the conclusion of the final patch, just like they did with the Shattering for Wrath of the Lich King and Tides of War for Cataclysm. Both coincidentally also written by the same person who wrote this book, Christie Golden. The last we saw of Garrosh Hellscream, former war chief of the Horde, was him being defeated following the Siege of Orgrimmar. Varian Wrynn stops Thrall, now more commonly known as Goel, from striking the killing blow with his Doomhammer, and the two agree to Taranzu's request to let his fate be decided on Pandaria. Vol'jin, leader of the Darkspear Trolls, is elected the new war chief of the Horde by his fellow Horde leaders, and Varian Wrynn decides to not follow Jaina Proudmoore's advice to dismantle the Horde, telling Vol'jin instead that because some amongst the Horde stood against Garrosh's tyranny, he is willing to let the conflict end. And so now we begin the trial of Garrosh Hellscream, the first of its kind for the world of Azeroth. Let us delve into war crimes. Taranzu and the August Celestials have deemed that they alone will not decide Garrosh's fate, since they were not the only ones affected by him. Thus, they invite all of the leaders of the Horde, the Alliance, and neutral factions to the Temple of the White Tiger. All of the leaders of the Horde and Alliance do attend, and for neutral parties we have Alexstrasza the Lifebinder, Ysera the Green Dragon aspect, and as well as Wrathion. To avoid any possible accidents, all parties involved have agreed to not bring their weapons, and a magical dampening field has been placed over the courtroom, stopping any possible spellcasting, even from the light. Taranzu informs those in attendance that not only have they decided the leaders of Azeroth will have a hand in deciding Garrosh's fate, but that a trial will actually occur. The Horde will choose a defender to argue for a more lenient sentence, while the Alliance will have an accuser to argue for a more stringent one. Each side also gets one veto to forbid a choice of the other faction to the position, and Taranzu will be the judge, with the August Celestials themselves being the jury. It is important to note that Taranzu says this trial is not to deem if Garrosh is guilty or not, because he is quite obviously definitely guilty, but is to choose his actual punishment. After a short discussion, the Horde decides upon Bane, much to his displeasure, because they believe he will be the most fair. The Alliance then announces they are choosing Varian to be their accuser, which the Horde then decides to veto. With the smirk, Varian then immediately announces they are choosing Tyrande, and Sylvanas and Vol'jin instantly realize the Alliance has played them, and they were going to choose Tyrande all along. With each side having chosen, they return to their homes to begin their strategy. Bane is struggling immensely with the idea of having to defend Garrosh. He performs a ritual to talk with his father Cairn's spirit, who convinces him to honorably defend the former war chief. Kairaz Dormu, the bronze dragon met on the Timeless Isle, appears from a portal, requesting that Taranzu wishes to speak with him. Tyrande, on the other hand, returns to Darnassus and begins telling Malfurion all that occurred at the temple. Malfurion worries that his trial might change Tyrande, although she tells him it won't. Chronomaru, better known as Chromie, appears in her gnome form from a portal, telling Tyrande that Taranzu also wishes to speak with her. When they both arrive, Taranzu explains that more important than how Garrosh is punished is how the trial is run. If they appear too harsh, Garrosh might come across as a martyr, but if they come across too lenient, the tension between the Horde and the Alliance might widen again. He tells the two that there are whispers that either side might resort to trickery or lies, but they have a way to prevent that. Kairaz says they will be using the Vision of Time, that the players during the Timeless Isle quest chain use themselves during the trial to prevent either side from lying about what might have happened in the past. Kairaz will be advising Bane on this, and Chromie will be advising Tyrande. As the trial begins, Garrosh is brought in and the charges against him are read: genocide, murder, forcible transfer of population, enforced disappearance of individuals, enslavement, abduction of children, torture, killing of prisoners, forced pregnancy, the wanton destruction of cities, towns, and villages not justified by military or civilian necessity, including the Vale of the Eternal Blossoms and Theramore. Afterward, Garrosh is asked what he says to these charges. He begins applauding and laughing, calling the trial akin to the Darkmoon Faire, and saying he will not claim he is guilty, for that implies shame, nor that he will say he is innocent because he never claimed as such. We then see Zayla, warlord of the Dragon Maw, arriving at Grim Batol. She survived the fall from Galakras during the Siege of Orgrimmar, and she and what forces of hers remained prepared to save Garrosh before he's executed. She also receives a message from somebody saying that as long as Garrosh lives, there is hope for the true Horde, and her scout says the one who delivered this message to him was not an orc, but a dragon. Back at the trial, we see Tyrande call her first witness, the Prophet Velen. Tyrande then shows 4 scenes to begin her case. The first is of a young Durotan and Orgrim Doomhammer meeting Restylon, a Draenei. They were brought before Restylon after Durotan and Orgrim were saved from an ogre by a Draenei hunting party. The next vision is Durotan and Orgrim watching Restylon use an Atamal crystal and an incantation to unveil their hidden city of Telmor. The third vision is Durotan and Orgrim years later using the same crystal and the same incantation to reveal the city so that the Horde, who at this point have declared war on the Draenei, can invade and kill them all. The scene shows the Horde killing every Draenei they could find. Durotan is seen dueling and then killing Restylon himself. Tyrande concludes the scene by showing a young Draenei girl out of desperation running up to Durotan and trying to fight him without a weapon before being killed by another orc. The final vision she shows is an orc asking Durotan what to do with any Draenei they find alive, to which Durotan simply says, kill them all. Suffice it to say, Goel and Agra are very pissed that Tyrande is doing what they feared she would all along, putting all of the orcs on trial instead of just Garrosh. After this, Tyrande rests and Bane begins his defense. He shows the whole scene of the Draenei girl dying, and we learn that Tyrande purposefully manipulated that scene by ending it early. After the Draenei girl is killed, we then see Durotan's face, tears falling, before he howls in despair, anger, and rage. Bane segues into this by asking Velen how he feels about the orcs now. The prophet says he is glad they were able to overcome the curse of drinking the blood of Manaroth. He believes all orcs can change from evil to good with time, and Bane ends his questioning. Tyrande then begins again and simply asks Velen to point out that at that point when Telmor fell, Durotan nor any of the orcs had drank the blood of Manaroth yet. After this, the trial breaks for an hour, and during this time, Anduin and Wrathion meet up and discuss Tyrande's tactics. Tyrande then calls her second witness, an orc mushroom seller named Corjus, who owns a shop in Orgrimmar called Dark Earth. She then shows her first scene of Melkrok, the leader of the Kor'kron under Garrosh, where he and his Kor'kron enter Corjus' shop and brutally beat him for speaking out against the war chief. Tyrande asks if this incident was the only one of its kind, and Corjus explains no it's not, and that there was an explosion at the Razor Hills Inn. Tyrande then shows her second and final vision for this witness, of Forsaken Captain Frandris Farley and Blood Knight Kelantir Bloodblade of the Blood Elves in Razor Hills Inn, being confronted by Garrosh, who then leaves and the inn explodes, killing them both. Bane then begins his defense and gets Corjus to admit that it is possible, however unlikely, that Melkorok was acting of his own accord and not under Garrosh's orders, and then ends his defense. Tyrande simply counters this by noting Garrosh is also being tried for the actions of his allies as well. Bane then asks for a 10-minute break so he can speak with Garrosh, during which he pleads with him to give him something to counter Tyrande with, who is increasingly looking like she's winning the trial thus far. But Garrosh says he will talk with one and only one person alone. Cut back to the trial, and Tyrande calls her next witness, Varrock Saurfang. She asks him if he believes that he and others have used the Horde as a license to murder, and he says yes, recalling the actions of the old Horde. She asks if he condones this behavior now, and he says no, and says he expressed this sentiment to Garrosh himself. Tyrande finally shows her first vision, the speech between Garrosh and Saurfang at Warsong Hold in Borean Tundra. Tyrande's point here is to show a great war hero threatening to kill Garrosh before he'd let him plunge the orcs into another devastating war for no reason, and then she rests her case. Bane counters successfully by getting Saurfang to say he does not wish to see Garrosh executed, but instead be allowed to challenge him to a Mat Gora. And if Garrosh had won, he should be freed and have to earn back his honor and reputation. And then Bane rests. We are then shown Shokia, who was once part of the Darkspear Rebellion in Hammerfall. We learn that she actually is allied to Garrosh instead, and has been just deep undercover this entire time. She's waiting for word from an ally, and then gets a note to meet a different ally at Dry Whisker Gorge. She shows up and is met by Zayla, and Shokia is impressed she is alive, and the two resolve to find some more allies to help free their war chief. Back at the trial, Anduin is summoned as a witness. Tyrande goes through great length to demonstrate that Anduin is a proponent of peace and does not hate the Horde. She then begins talking about Garrosh with regards to the Horde, and Anduin brings up the peace talks in Theramore, where Thrall and Varian come to terms trading-wise, but Garrosh did not want to see the point of the trading and kept interrupting Thrall and saying the Horde should just take what it's wanted. Tyrande then has Anduin explain again in great detail the events surrounding Anduin being crushed by the remnants of the Divine Bell, and uses her one and only vision with this witness to show what happened as well. She rests her case after showing this great proponent of peace could not sway Garrosh from his warmongering ways and was quite literally almost crushed to death by Garrosh. Bane examines Anduin and tries to get to the bottom of why Anduin would risk his life to try and stop Garrosh. Anduin finally admits that he believes Garrosh could still change and should not be executed, so he has the opportunity to do so. Bane rests and the trial ends for the day. As Bane and Vol'jin are leaving, Sylvanas catches up to Bane and begins scolding him for doing too well of a job. She tells the two that she does not object to Bane doing a good job, but objects to him doing so good a job that he might actually win. Vol'jin tells her to leave Bane be, and she will get her kill in its own time. After they leave, Sylvanas scoffs at this notion, saying she would not let her kill come in its own time. She's going to take matters into her own hands. Moments before she leaves through a portal for the Undercity, though, she is given a message. After a time, she comes home and opens the package, and the letter reads, "Once we were on the same side, perhaps we can be so again." Alongside this is also a locket, which Sylvanas recognizes immediately, as she has her own version of it. Illyria, her sister, gave Sylvanas and Verisa, their other sister, a locket before she left for Outland, and the message had Verisa's locket in it, and she was the author of it. Sylvanas responds to her sister's message with, "I will see you at home after court." Verisa gets the missive, but turns to go back into the court only to see the trial has been concluded for the day. Varian and Anduin are called into the court by Taranzu, but Verisa is turned away and thus leaves for the Ghostlands. Inside, Anduin learns that he is the one that Garrosh wishes to speak to. At their first meeting, Garrosh tries to intimidate Anduin, but eventually the two speak about destiny. Garrosh wonders if Anduin chose to follow the light, or if the light chose to follow him. Anduin has no answer, and then Garrosh asks if he could deny the light if he wanted to Anduin's confusion once again. Garrosh finishes by comparing Anduin to another golden-haired human prince who was once a paladin and followed the light. Incensed, Anduin yelled that he is nothing like Arthas, and before he storms out of the room, Garrosh responds with, "No, but I might be." In the Ghostlands, Verisa meets up with Sylvanas, and the two of them discuss Garrosh and his trial. They both agree that he needs to die for what he's done, and neither of them really trust Taranzu or the August Celestials to come to that decision. Verisa requests that Sylvanas creates an untraceable poison to murder Garrosh before the conclusion of the trial. But before she will agree to do so, however, Sylvanas wants to know why Verisa wants him dead so badly. After several excuses, Verisa finally breaks down and says, "He took my Ronin," and begins to cry, and Sylvanas hugs her. Back at the trial, Tyrande calls her fifth witness, Vol'jin. She begins by highlighting all of the terrible things Garrosh had done to him and his people, beginning with forcing them into the slums of Orgrimmar. She then shows her first vision, the discussion that Vol'jin had with Garrosh in the throne room right after becoming war chief, where he threatened to kill Vol'jin. She then segues this into showing her second vision, the assassination attempt on Vol'jin, on Garrosh's orders. She finishes with one final scene where Garrosh explicitly orders his Kor'kron bodyguard to kill Vol'jin if he protests what they learn in the Sarrak cave. After Bane begins examining Vol'jin, he argues that because Vol'jin directly threatened Garrosh after he had been rightfully made war chief by Thrall, Vol'jin was pretty blatantly committing treason. Bane argued that Garrosh could have been afraid for his life, essentially throwing Vol'jin under the bus to make it seem as if Garrosh's command to assassinate Vol'jin was justified. After the day is over, Anduin meets with Garrosh again. Anduin pushes Garrosh's buttons by insinuating he tried to assassinate Vol'jin because he was scared of him, instead of challenging him to a Mak-Gor. Garrosh says he has never forgotten his people's traditions, and if he could, he would stop at nothing to ensure a proud and glorious future for the Orcs. Anduin stumps Garrosh then by asking what if the Alliance stood with him in this regard, and he demands that Anduin leaves. We then see Jaina and Kalagos down at a beach in Kunlai Summit. Essentially, Kalagos tries to convince Jaina that she's become so bitter, and it seems to like this dark place that her heart is found, that this is coming between the two of them. He essentially tells her that if she still basks in this hatred after the trial is over, he is going to leave her. The scene then cuts to Silvermoon, where Thaylen Songweaver, the Sunreaver agent loyal to Garrosh, who developed the mana bomb that destroyed Theramore, and secretly brought down Theramore's defenses under the pretense of joining the Kirin Tor's defenses, begins reflecting on his status. He realizes that after the trial is over, Lord Thamar, who Thalen believes has grown too soft and too friendly towards the Alliance, will put him in prison. He then receives 2 visitors at his home, Zayla and Shokia. Zayla tells him that because he was once rescued from Theramore's prisons, that he might be the sort of person who wants to return the favor. Day 4 of the trial begins, and Tyrande calls Goel as a witness. She establishes his character by listing off his various accomplishments, and then questions his reasoning for appointing Garrosh Warchief, as well as showing a vision of that scene. Before resting, she gets Goel to admit that he returned from his position as leader of the Earthen Ring to help retake the Echo Isles because Garrosh had turned on his own people, pitting brother against brother. We then cut to Westguard Keep, the Alliance's base in the Howling Fjord, where the goblin Harrowmiser and his zeppelin, the Ladylug, have been held prisoner there for years. Westguard Keep is then attacked by Shokia's forces, and Zayla and Thalen, hidden in human armor, take Harrowmiser and steal his zeppelin along with him. Zayla needs the airship and Harrowmiser's gold to buy some of the North Sea Freebooters, a group of pirates in Northrend. They all meet up together and then head off to Pandaria to meet with Zayla's Dragonmaw. But it is now Bane's time to examine Goel, and his examination is absolutely fantastic for Garrosh's defense. He acknowledges that Goel has admitted several times, even in the own trial, that he has made mistakes in his life, but then goes on to discredit him by showing the courtroom the scene from Thrall's past where he fights and kills Blackmore, where Thrall, who has the upper hand, gives Blackmore the opportunity to fight him fairly by giving him a shield and a sword. Bane then asks why was he ready to kill Garrosh in cold blood when he did this to Blackmore. Bane then shows 2 more scenes. The first is when Thrall split into 4 elemental spirits during the events of the Fireland raid, where he admits that Garrosh is going to lead his people to ruin. The second and more impactful scene is a meeting between Thrall and Cairn, where Cairn tells Thrall not to appoint Garrosh. Bane asks if given the same opportunity like he had at the end of the Siege of Orgrimmar, would he try and kill Garrosh again? Goel says no, and Bane rests after asking if Garrosh should have the same chance to correct his mistakes after Goel admitted he wanted to have the chance to correct his own. But Goel says there are some things you can never correct, and sometimes you just have to stop what is causing the damage before it does more. Bane rests, and then Tyrande examines Goel again. She decides to show a scene of the end time with the world destroyed and Twilight Dragons ruling over its ashes. And Goel realizes she's showing this scene to prove that, at least in some part, because of Goel choosing to leave the Horde and join the Earthen Ring, this future is prevented. And then Tyrande herself rests as well. Back to Sylvanas and Verisa. Verisa says she has been speaking with the Pandaren food vendors and learned much more about the food schedules of everybody involved in the trial, including Garrosh. However, she does not want to kill anybody else except Garrosh himself, much to the annoyance of Sylvanas. The only other significant thing to note from this scene is that Sylvanas is beginning to have feelings of love and warmth as a result of spending so much time with her, and she even begins joking with Verisa. And then day 5 of the trial begins, and Caligos again compares the trial to the theatricality of the Darkmoon Fair, where Jaina corrects him saying people are hurt and some of them, including herself, need this. Caligos simply responds by saying what good will the trial do if she's content not to move on and just remain in the dark place. Tyrande then calls her next witness, Alexstrasza the Lifebinder. Despite Bane's protest, Tyrande is allowed to present the actions of the Dragonmaw, reflecting on Garrosh, because they continue to enslave and torment dragons even after joining Garrosh's horde. After all, one of the charges is the actions of him and his allies. Alexstrasza explains in great and grim detail her enslavement by Necro Skullcrusher and his Dragonmaw. Tyrande does not use any visions, as the court simply takes Alexstrasza's word for what has happened. Tyrande finishes by repeating some of the charges appropriate to Alexstrasza: enslavement, torture, forced pregnancy, the abduction of children, and the killing of prisoners. Bane then begins, and he does not have to do much. He simply gets Alexstrasza to admit that she doesn't hate any race on Azeroth, and would gladly accept the apology of any one of the Dragonmaw orcs if they come to her and ask for it. After Alexstrasza's testimony, Anduin, who has been enraged by what he has learned, goes to Garrosh's cell and demands he explain how he could do any of the things he had just heard. Garrosh simply says Anduin would not understand, although the prince does partially. He understands that Garrosh wishes for the orcs to live prosperously, but not any of the other terrible things. Back to Windrunner Spire, Verisa tells Sylvanas she has figured out how to poison Garrosh. They don't need to poison his food, but just simply the sunfruit that he squeezes on top of his meal. Garrosh will be the one to poison himself. Sylvanas, again feeling the warmth and happiness of being with her sister, finds the plan brilliant. Vereesa says this feels like destiny, and Sylvanas agrees, but even goes further. She asks what purpose Vereesa has in the Alliance, and asks her to come and rule by her side in Undercity. At the end, Sylvanas admits she wants Vereesa with her, and actually pleads with her to stay at her side. We then begin day 6 of the trial. Tyrande calls her next witness, a former Kor'kron member named Gekorg. Tyrande shows a vision of Gekorg taking care of Magnetar younglings. Tyrande asks if the younglings were ever tortured, and Gekorg says no. He would give the younglings meat soaked in honey, and they would make a lot of noise eating it. The adult Magnetar could not tell what they were doing to the children, just that they were making a lot of noise, and that worry kept them manageable. They were then used when Garrosh attacked Ashenvale and were all killed during that battle. The adult Magnetar died, believing they kept part of their bargain that they had struck with Garrosh, where he told them if they fought for the Horde, he would release their younglings. And he kept his word, but also didn't. Gekorg explains that Garrosh tricked the Magnetar with a bit of verbal somersaulting. The Magnetar assumed Garrosh meant he would take them home, but instead sent them loose on the shores of Ashara. Gekorg tells the court if they were in Northrend, the younglings might have been able to defend themselves and survive, but the Naga on the beaches of Ashara ensured that they did not. Tyrande asks Gekorg what he did after he realized this, and he tells her he removed his tabard and disappeared. Bane finds himself unable to even cross-examine the witness, and rests without doing anything. It is at this moment that a Night Elf Sentinel enters the courtroom and runs to Tyrande. The two chat for a moment, and then Tyrande submits a formal request to have the trial regarded as irreparably compromised. Terran-Zu has Tyrande, Bane, Kairos, and Chromie approach the bench, and she says she has learned of new information that proves Bane has a conflict of interest in representing Garrosh, and a new defender needs to be chosen. Bane naturally is outraged, but Tyrande says she has a witness to prove her claim. Terran-Zu says if the evidence is true and fair, Garrosh will have the choice to keep Bane or get rid of him if he wants. Longwalker, Perith, Stormhoof. At first, Stormhoof refuses to speak at all, considering the duties of a Longwalker are to deliver messages, but also they are privy to the information on them as well as advising Cairn and Bane, and he feels he would be betraying them if he told the courtroom anything. Despite threats to hold him indefinitely until he does choose to testify, it isn't until Bane commands him to do so that he does. Stormhoof explains how he came into Bane's service, due to Cairn's death, and speaks about the night that Cairn died. She then shows her first vision, a meeting between Bane, Stormhoof, Archdruid Hamul Runetotem, and a hunter named Jorn Skyseer. They all discuss where they could turn for aid in this moment, and end up discounting all of the other Horde races. So Bane decides to go ask the same woman that Thrall trusted, Jaina Proudmoore, and the courtroom erupts. Jaina can feel all of the eyes on her, and Anduin as well looks shocked, as he was aware of this meeting. Jaina learns apparently that Anduin had not told anyone either. Behind them, Varian is screaming at Jaina, asking why she didn't tell him about this. Varian tells her this is exactly like when she decided to expel the Sunreavers from Dalaran, and she needs to tell him about things like this. Anduin speaks up and tells Varian he also has something to tell him. Terran-Zu calls for a 10-minute respite, after which Tyrande has Stormwolf explain that Jaina gave Bane aid in the form of gold. She then asks if this is the only time Bane met with Jaina, and Stormhoof says no, and Tyrande begins to present the second vision. Tyrande shows the vision of Stormhoof arriving at Theramore to meet with Jaina a different time. This time, it is to warn her about the Horde's imminent attack on Theramore. After the scene ends, Jaina asks Varian if he's going to arrest her for treason. Varian tells Jaina to answer one simple question. Did she think it was part of Garrosh's plan all along to have Stormhoof tell Jaina so she could request the aid and get all of the Alliance's generals at Theramore, who they lose when it is destroyed? Jaina says no, and Varian actually agrees with her. Terran-Zu tells Bane he may take a moment to speak with Garrosh to determine if he still wants Bane to defend him, but Garrosh finally speaks up during his trial and says he wants to keep Bane as his defender. Tyrande rests after this, and Terran-Zu asks her if she has any more witnesses to summon. She says only one, and tomorrow she will be able to. After court gets out, Varian demands to speak with Jaina and Anduin, during which he scolds her for not having told him about the meeting between herself and Bane. Jaina tells him he would never have believed Bane in the first place because he was with the Horde, but because she did, she was able to get civilians out of Theramore, before the Horde had arrived. Anduin explains that Jaina did not involve him in this mess, but he stumbled upon it accidentally. Varian says he has a good mind to put both of them in prison, but then Jaina snaps. She tells Varian he will not address her in this manner. She is a leader in her own right, not one of his lieutenants, and certainly not one of his children. Varian simply responds by saying no, but she is a member of the Alliance, and then Jaina says the more she thinks about it, the more she believes the former leaders of the Kirin Tor were right. It is better to be independent. Before she leaves, she threatens Varian to not push her, because she will push back if she has to. As Anduin and Varian's discussion is dying down, a messenger arrives and gives Varian a missive. He has been called to be the only witness by Bane. Following this, Anduin goes down to the beach he had before, and Wrathion shows up and asks if he isn't going to see Garrosh today. This surprises Anduin, as Wrathion shouldn't know this. Day 7 of the trial begins, and Tyrande calls her final witness, Jaina herself. During her testimony, Jaina explains what she did after receiving the news that the Horde was going to attack Theramore. Tyrande then shows her first vision, showing Ronan sacrificing himself to draw the mana bomb's radius toward Jaina's tower. Terran-Zu calls for a 20-minute respite, during which Jaina leaves, and Kalecgos, despite the advice of Anduin, declines to go and comfort her. Afterwards, Tyrande shows her second and final vision for Jaina when she returns to Theramore's ruins and sees the devastation wrought by the mana bomb, and then she rests. When it's Bane's turn to examine Jaina, he asks her about the giant tidal wave she creates with the focusing iris after Theramore's destruction, and how she was going to use it to destroy Orgrimmar. Jaina admits that if she had, she would have indeed have been like Garrosh or Arthas, and she would never want to be alike. He finishes by asking her if she felt how, for but a moment, she could understand how Garrosh would want to destroy an entire city, even civilians, since Jaina was planning to do the same to Orgrimmar. Reluctantly, Jaina answers yes, and Bane rests. Tyrande then steps up and asks if Jaina was glad she did not use a tidal wave, because the Alliance fleet, which was sailing to attack Orgrimmar, would have been caught in the blast, including Varian, and they all would have been destroyed. Jaina says she was glad because she would never ever want to be like Garrosh. Tyrande asks if she would never ever want to be like the Horde in general, and despite everything, Jaina simply says, the Horde is not Garrosh, and Tyrande immediately realizes her mistake and rests. Back in Tirisfal Glades, Sylvanas and Vereesa go for a ride as they used to all the time when they were children. They both discuss how happy they are they're going to be responsible for killing Garrosh, and Sylvanas reveals she has completed her poison, and Vereesa then reveals she has become so trusted in the Pandaren kitchens that they even allow her in there to watch, and she has learned how to cook the curry that Garrosh eats. Next, they discuss how Vereesa was going to come and live with her in the Undercity, as she was unsure if the Forsaken would recognize her as co-ruler. Through an inner monologue, the reader actually realizes that Sylvanas plans on killing Vereesa in her sleep painlessly, and then resurrecting her as a Forsaken to rule at her side. Vereesa says she will leave her boys and doll around since both she and Jaina agree the Undercity is no place for children, and then tells her sister that she hasn't been a very good mother anyway. Sylvanas is happy with this, as she did not want to kill her nephews as well. Sylvanas is happy that she and her sister, after killing and resurrecting her, could be together forever. It should be noted that Vereesa is totally unaware that Sylvanas plans on killing her and resurrecting her. On the 8th day of the trial, Bane finally summons his first and only real counter-witness, Varian. Bane immediately starts off by stating they are only here because Varian stopped Goel from killing Garrosh at the end of the Siege of Orgrimmar, but says he always didn't feel as lenient as he did then. Bane then shows his first vision, when Varian nearly kills Moira Thaurissan after she takes control of Ironforge. The Anduin in the vision tells Varian, after he tries to argue Anduin is spitting on an honorable man's grave by wanting Moira to rule, that even honorable men can still make mistakes. Bane asks Varian if he thinks he has changed, and he says yes. He did so because he cared for his people and his son. Bane asks if he thinks Garrosh cared for his people, and Varian says he thinks he did once, but not the Horde as a whole, only the orcs. Bane finishes by asking if Garrosh, who Varian himself already admitted cared for his people, and he himself had changed in part because he cared for his people, if he could change. Varian says yes, it is possible, and Bane rests. When Tyrande cross-examines Varian, she essentially tries to disprove him as a witness for Bane by saying he never craved power or plotted to annihilate an entire city by some very blatant questions such as, Varian, are you genocidal? Or Varian, have you ever plotted to destroy an entire city, including its civilians? With each side having called all of their witnesses, and each side having cross-examined those witnesses, the trial basically is coming to a close. Tyrande begins her opening statement by saying that Bane asks if people can change. Of course they can, she says, it is the nature of things to change. But sometimes, things changing always doesn't work out for the best. A tree can grow, but so can a malignancy. She begins taking stones out of a bag and placing them on her table. She then repeats all of the 10 charges against Garrosh, during which she places all 9 stones she had in her bag on her table. She then explains that each stone is from a place that will forever bear the memory of Garrosh. She explains each stone. She picks up the first one and says this one is from Stone Talon Mountains, where Overlord Kromgar murdered an entire village of innocent druids, believing he was following Garrosh's philosophy. She sarcastically notes that then Garrosh killed him for his dishonor. The second stone is from the arena of Orgrimmar, where the Mak'gora is fought, the place where Karen Bloodhoof died. This stone actually has splotches of blood on it, and Jaina thinks it probably is actually from Karen. The third stone is from Gilneas, where Garrosh Hellscream ordered it to be attacked and taken. The fourth stone is from Ajara, the once beautiful autumnal landscape, until Garrosh gave it to the goblins, who carved it up with machines into a giant horde symbol and even rendered its water undrinkable. She picks up the fifth stone with care and says it is from Ashenvale, rich with forests, streams, and life, ravaged on Garrosh's command, and the site of a battle fueled by the abduction of children and death of their parents. Unlike the other stones, which she slams back onto the table, she places this one down very carefully. The sixth piece looks like it's from a piece of lava from a volcano, and Tyrande explains it is from a molten giant, a powerful elemental enslaved by Garrosh's dark shaman, who cared not if the earth cried out in pain and anger at being abused. The seventh stone she picks up, looks at Jaina, and merely says Theramore before placing it back down. She picks up the eighth and says it is from Darnassus, the Night Elf's home, violated when the Sunreavers betrayed Dalaran and used their magic not to help the world, but to steal the Divine Bell, an artifact of mass destruction. Finally, she picks up the last piece, and her voice begins to crack. She says, the Veil of the Eternal Blossoms, an ancient place hidden away for millennia. Only recently have the Horde and the Alliance able to behold it, and now it is so gravely damaged it may take another millennia just for it again to reach full flower. All for Garrosh Hellscream's unspeakable, unstoppable lust for power for one faction of the Horde. She finishes by saying, I implore you to sentence Garrosh Hellscream to death for what he has done, to his enemies, to his allies, to the very land. He will not change. He cannot change. All there is of him is pride and hunger. As long as his heart beats, he will plot. As long as he breathes, he will butcher. End it. End him. Now. Bane begins his closing arguments a bit more general, and because of this, I'm actually just going to read them from the book, because it will give a better indication of his intent. The courtroom was silent when Tyrande returned to her seat. Jaina could almost feel the intensity of which everyone regarded Garrosh Hellscream. So many lives, so much pain, so much destruction, all by one orc, one! Was it possible for an individual to do more damage than his entire race? One who was sitting right here. One clean sword strike, one perfectly aimed fireball, and it would be over. Garrosh Hellscream would never harm anyone ever again. Her fingers itched to perform the motions of such spell. After a moment, Bane Bloodhoof rose. The sound of his hooves was very loud in the still chamber. Jaina felt a rush of pity for the Tauren and his impossible task. He stood, gathering his thoughts as he addressed the solemn, attentive Celestials. I know that you are expecting a passionate plea for mercy, an appeal to your wisdom and compassion. I may still make such a plea. I have not decided yet. What I wish to share with you now is not about Garrosh Hellscream. It is about me. His hand clasped together behind his back, and he began a slow walk of the circumference of the arena floor. When I was asked to defend Garrosh, I very definitely had no desire to do so. I envied Chisao Whisperwind, for not only she was more likely to win, but I wanted the chance to do what she had done. He stopped in front of Tyrande's desk. She looked at him, curious but wary. Bane picked up the second stone, the one from the Mak'gora arena. It had, Jaina was certain now, spatters of blood on it, which were probably the precise reason Tyrande had selected it. It could very likely be Karen's blood. Tyrande's eyes narrowed, but she did not stop him. Bane continued his ambling. What a satisfying thing it must have been to collect these stones, to permit herself to think about what had happened in these places, and how tragic and needless those events were. His hand closed tenderly around the small rock. To sit with Chromie and peer through time itself to find evidence of each count, and to say to the jury and the spectators, here, see this, see it, feel it, this is what Garrosh Hellscream has done. What is he doing, Jaina wondered. Is he just giving up? Admitting that defending Garrosh was a hopeless task from the beginning? So I went to Thunderbluff, to my home my father and War Chief Thrall had founded for my people. I went to breathe in its air and sit on its red stone and ask my father, what do I do? Bane gestured to Kador's cloud song, seated in the stands. I asked for a vision, and it came. Now, Bane's voice trembled slightly, and his hands tightened around the stone that possibly bore splatters of his father's lifeblood. My father knew I could not indulge in my hatred, my pain, and still hold my head high. He knew I needed to say yes, to truly defend Garrosh to the best of my ability, no matter what the outcome, or there would be no peace. He knew this because he knew me, and also because my father, who died at Garrosh's hand, would have done the same had he yet lived. And so I agreed to represent Garrosh. I spent many hours with Kairaz researching events, as Tyrande has done, and I found that there is simply no way to truly defend Garrosh Hellscream. There simply isn't. The only defense is to go beyond the events and into what truly matters. Bane looked again at the rock nestled in his large palm. Tyrande has gone to great lengths to find these stones for her closing argument. I did not belittle that, or the pain I am certain she felt as she gathered them and thought about what they signified. But I must tell you, poignant as her presentation was, it was exactly that. A presentation. A show just like the Visions of Time were, and in a way just like the Dark Moon Fair, to which this trial has been unfavorably compared, most certainly is. Looking right at the jury, he crushed the small rock with his powerful fingers. It means nothing. Jaina felt a surge of anger, of offense. How could he do this? Destroy so callously what should have been a precious memory of his father. Other ripples of displeasure surged through the room. Taranzu picked up his mallet and the murmurs quieted. Bane, unperturbed by the reaction, opened his hand and let the dust trickle to the floor. In the end, this is all that becomes. We are all dust. Rocks, trees, creatures, fields of frost and forest, Tauren, Night Elf, Orc. This is what we become. And it does not matter. It does not matter that we die. What matters is that we lived. He looked about the arena, slightly challenging now. It is only when there is life that things can change. Only while we live can we comfort a friend, or raise little ones, or build a city. My father lived, and he did so fully and well. He taught me many lessons. Now Bane looked straight at Jaina and Anduin. He once said destruction is easy, but creating something that lasts, that, my father said, was a challenge. He reached for another stone, the one from Theramore, where he, Jaina, and Anduin had talked about so many things. I could smash Garrosh's Hellscream skull with this rock, or I could use it to build a city. I could grind corn upon it, or heat it for cooking. I could cover it with bright paint and use it in a ceremony to honor the Earth Mother. Whatever we do or do not do with this rock, it will become dust one day. All that matters is what we do with it while we live. And I believe that if we truly look into our hearts past the fear and the wounds that guard them, we know this to be true. We have all done things we are ashamed of. We have all done things we wish we could take back. We all carry within us the potential to become our own versions of Garrosh Hellscream. And I watched the Vision of Time display these events in the trial. I began to see this. I saw it in Duratan, who attacked Telmor, but who later was exiled by his own people for his beliefs. In Gakorg, who left an envied position as member of the Korkron because he was so sickened by what he was ordered to do to innocent younglings. King Varian, and here Bane pointed, you once held a sword to the throat of a woman clad only in a nightgown, who had no defenses. And now the two of you are friends and allies. Alexstrasza, so terribly abused, she forgives as deeply as she suffered, because she knows, as all of us should know, it is the only way. He looked at Jaina again. His eyes were full of compassion. The Lady of Theramore, which is no more, has suffered loss and betrayal. She is no aspect, imbued with extraordinary patience and purpose to sustain her. And we have seen and heard her grief and her fury. But even she understands. She does not wish to be like Garrosh. Bane turned back to the Celestials, who watched him intently. Tyrande speaks of true justice. I believe that you know what it is. And I believe that we here today will see it done. Thank you. After Bane's testimony, Jaina sits beneath a cherry tree, off the beaten path outside. She considers everything Bane has said, as well as her relationship with Kalagos. A messenger then arrives with a note from her, written by Vol'jin. It states, "It took some time for me to learn what happened in Dalaran. You used to be a woman of peace, you be that no more. Garrosh scorches earth, and the dead ain't the only victims. You got no blame or hate from me no matter what you feel towards Garrosh or the Horde. We all got our ghosts." Meanwhile, we learn that Verisa has now been working with the head chef, and under the guise of learning the recipes so she could make it after the trial is over, is tasked with chopping basil and cutting up the sunfruit. Verisa successfully drops the poison into every slice of the sunfruit that is being sent to Garrosh, and goes to leave the kitchen. As she does, the head chef tells Verisa that, when she comes back to visit, she should bring her little ones. The chef says they must be beautiful boys. Suddenly, Verisa now as well realizes how much she's missed them, and their laughter, and then tries to picture them with her in the Undercity, and simply cannot. As she is thinking of these things, Anduin ends up running into her. Anduin tells her that he is going to see Garrosh and explains he has been talking with him every day and that this might be his last chance before the verdict is read. Varisa then believes that the light is at work here and tells Anduin that Garrosh's food is poisoned and that he can do with that knowledge what he will, and then runs off. She takes a portal to Dalaran and then is gone. Anduin sprints to Garrosh's cell but finds he hasn't even come back yet. Once he does, Garrosh continues to berate him, saying he is still so wet behind the ears it's as if he just recently left his mother's womb. His food soon arrives, and Anduin watches Garrosh begin to prepare his dinner, and wonders to himself if letting Garrosh die in this way is actually the light's work. Garrosh squeezes the poisoned sunfruit over his meal, and right before he eats it, Anduin rushes to the cage, reaches in, and knocks it to the ground. He tells Garrosh the food is poisoned, but he grabs Anduin's arm from inside the cage and threatens to tear it off. It isn't until a rat, which had been living in the bedding that Garrosh slept on, emerges and begins eating the poisoned food and dies that he believes Anduin and shoves him backward. In Dalaran, a message arrives for Varisa from Anduin telling her Garrosh did not die. In Tirisfal, though, a messenger has brought a letter from Varisa to Sylvanas, telling her sister about what she had done. Sylvanas, angry and heartbroken, rides through Tirisfal Glades, killing anything and everything as her horse just rides indiscriminately. Eventually, she falls to the ground on her knees, her face in her hands, and wept like a broken child who had lost everything. Slowly, the coldness that Varisa's presence had kept away crept back in, and Sylvanas rose. Realizing she should have known better, known that hoping for anything was foolish, she remounts her horse. The Banshee Queen would never again make the same mistake of believing she could love. The courtroom packs itself once again as the final verdict is about to be read. Goel notes that Kairos himself stood nearby Bane's table and was tinkering with the Vision of Time, believing that he was deactivating it. Goel notes that this seems inappropriate at this time, and wonders why Chromie isn't there helping him. Garrosh is brought in, and he also notices that Chromie is missing. Taranzu begins, asking if Garrosh had anything he wanted to say before the verdict was read. And because it is quite spectacular, I will read it exactly from the book, just as is written. Garrosh regarded the crowd as if seeing them for the first time. He turned in a tight circle as he looked around the ring, pausing here and there for a moment. At one point, he locked gazes with Anduin, and something flickered across his face. "Yes," he said, his strong voice carrying easily in the large space. "I do have something to say, Honorable Taranzu. August Celestials, spectators from all across Azeroth. I have heard everything you have heard. I have seen what you have seen." He moved to face Tyrande, who sat quietly, perfectly composed. Tyrande Whisperwind has presented a strong and damning case against me. A case that has roused some of you to anger and thoughts of revenge. Thoughts of my death. I do not blame you for hungering for that. He gave Tyrande a slight smirk, and then turned to his defender. Bane too looked composed, though somewhat more grim than Tyrande. Bane Bloodhoof, who had had little cause to do so, has with great earnestness presented a case not protesting my innocence, but asking for your understanding, for your compassion. For you, the jury and the spectators, to look within your own hearts, and then see that no one is completely free from blame. Then, to Anduin's surprise, Garrosh turned to face him, and Prince Anduin Wrynn, who by all rights should be the foremost amongst those clamoring for my death, has chosen to spend hours in my company. I attempted to slay him in a brutal, cruel, and painful manner. And what does he do? Garrosh shook his head as if in disbelief. He speaks to me of the light. He tells me he believes I can change. He has shown me kindness when I offered hatred and violence. It is because of him that I stand before you, facing what I expect to be a pronouncement of my death as a warrior and not as a broken slave. He lifted his shackled hands and gave Anduin a slight bow before turning to face the crowd once more. Oh yes, I know full well how much blood is on my hands. I know exactly the magnitude and the consequences of what I have done. He took a deep breath, seemed to be gathering his thoughts. Anduin leaned forward, not wanting to hope, but hoping wildly, beautifully anyway. And here now, at this moment, when I am free to speak my mind and heart, I tell you true, I regret. His laughter rang through the arena. Nothing! Anduin forgot to breathe. He felt cold, numb. He sat staring at Garrosh, for a moment unable to mentally process the words. Sounds hammered in his ears, the outraged cries of a furious public. Taranzu struck the gong futilely, calling for order. But Garrosh, as it seemed, had only begun. He lifted his shackled arms and bellowed, "Yes, yes, I would destroy 1,000 Theramores if it would bring the Alliance to its knees. I would hunt down every knight of whelp that bleats on its face of this world and silence their mewling forever. I would banish every troll, every tauren, every simpering blood elf and greedy goblin and shambling walking corpse if it were within my power." And it almost was! Anduin realized his father had been repeating his name. He looked over at Varian unsteadily, overwhelmed with shock and disillusionment. Anduin, Varian said for perhaps the third time. Come on, Goel wants to talk to us, and I think I know why. Goel stood near the entrance. As he met Anduin's gaze, he jerked his head slightly toward the corridor that led outside. Anduin nodded, licking his lips and shaking his head, as he and Varian treaded their way to the stairs. On the floor below, Garrosh continued. Anduin clenched his jaw. How could he believe that Garrosh had changed? The only atrocities I regret are the ones I did not perform, the orc shouted, grinning ferociously at the turmoil his words had caused. The only thing that preys on me is I was stopped before I could see the true horde rise again. End quote. Varian and Anduin begin leaving, meet up with Goel, and they acknowledge Chromie's absence. Anduin goes to find her, and after arriving at Garrosh's cell area, he sees 2 guards incapacitated. Anduin heals them, and they say that 2 women had attacked them with crossbows. Anduin then notices Chromie was inside Garrosh's cell, and she tells him it was Kairos who put her there, after she caught him manipulating the vision of time. Turning around, he comes face to face with none other than Wrathion, who explains that Anduin once asked him to make up his own mind what is best for Azeroth, and he has done this. But, as the Prince of Stormwind, Anduin's first and foremost duty is to keep his kingdom, Stormwind, safe. As the last Black Dragon, Wrathion's duty is to keep Azeroth as a whole safe. Wrathion tells Anduin farewell for now and incapacitates him. Back in the courtroom, Garrosh is still ranting, but Jaina has been watching Kairos. She notices a second too late that Kairos pushes the vision of time off the table. Several time portals begin opening up, and Kairos and Garrosh jump through one of them. Before anybody can follow, things begin coming out of the portals as well. Jaina sees a figure with silver hair and a strand of gold. She realizes it's herself, and with herself is another version of Kalecgos. Jaina begins fighting with the alternate version of herself, and Kalecgos runs to the floor to transform into his dragon form. Jaina has a moment to look at this other version of herself, who looks twisted and cold, and Jaina wonders what she will do in that universe to become this person. Outside the temple, Varian and Goel see Harrow Miser's Zeppelin approaching at the same time that Kairos knocks the vision of time off the table inside. They rush inside, and Goel catches Kairos and Garrosh with victorious smirks on their faces disappearing. He then sees all the alternate figures coming out of the portals, and one of them is himself. But this thrall is wearing human armor and bears the tabard of a D-list Blackmoor. The alternate thrall charges the spectators, but Goel cuts him off and begins fighting himself. Zayla watches as her dragon maw attack the temple on the backs of, shockingly, infinite dragons. She recalls Kairos speaking to her, and at this point we realize it has been Kairos who told Zayla to do everything she has done thus far, and Kairos offers dragons to her cause. In this flashback, Zayla asks if they were bronze dragons, but Kairos says no. He explains the bronze dragonflight would see time unfold as it wills, no matter the consequences. However, the infinite dragonflight and himself believe in altering time to suit their will. In an eerily similar situation to Theramore, Kairos planned to have all of their enemies in the same place at the same time, and he sought to destroy them all in one foul swoop. Riding an infinite dragon herself, Zayla tells Shokia, Harrow Miser, and Thalen Songweaver that she is going on ahead to find Kairos and Garrosh, and rides off. The remaining 3 begin attacking the guards outside the temple. Shokia uses her rifle, while Harrow Miser and Thalen begin tossing mini mana bombs down below. As their attack begins, several infinite dragons begin breathing what is described as dark sand upon their enemies, and it is revealed that Kairos also disabled the dampening field over the temple before he escaped. Inside the temple, Anduin recovers from whatever Wrathion did to him, and runs into the courtroom to warn everyone, only to see the chaos already unfolding. He first sees an alternate version of Vol'jin, wearing a necklace of human and elven ears, cackling madly. He next sees an alternate Bane, wearing the War Chief armor. And finally, he sees an alternate version of himself, but wearing the coronation robes of the King of Stormwind, huddling on the ground, his knees pulled into his chest, frozen with horror, and clutching his own version of Fearbreaker. Anduin watches Vol'jin as he goes off after King Anduin, and darts toward them fighting. Anduin takes the King's Fearbreaker and uses it to temporarily blind the alternate Vol'jin, before striking him with it. Alternate Vol'jin stumbles back, but comes back swinging wildly, trying to cut his ear off. Anduin strikes again, but alternate Vol'jin counters easily and strikes Anduin in the shoulder, sending him backward. Anduin looks up to see the alternate Vol'jin draw back his glaive for a killing blow, but before he can attack, King Anduin rushes the alternate Vol'jin. He stumbles for a second, but easily tosses King Anduin off of him and stabs him squarely in the chest. Before alternate Vol'jin can attack our Anduin, though, Chromie arrives in dragon form and grabs alternate Vol'jin, throwing him across the room. Anduin crawls across the floor to the alternate version of himself to see that the king is dying. He tells Chromie that he leapt at Vol'jin with no weapon and saved his life. Chromie begins to leave to try and destabilize the rifts that are open, and Anduin asks what he needs to do. Chromie tells him that he's already doing it, and the alternate versions of everyone can be stopped by getting them to accept our universe's version of themselves. They will disappear and return to their own time. And then she leaves. The dying Anduin tells our Anduin that he was too scared and couldn't do anything, but our Anduin tells him he came through when it counted. The king tells him that it's cold here, and he's afraid, but Anduin tells him soon he'll be with his mother and father. King Anduin asks if their father is alive in this universe, and Anduin says yes. The king tells him he wishes he could see him, and Anduin says he will, but the king tells him he's as bad of a liar as he himself is. Telling Anduin to tell their father he loves him, King Anduin dies and disappears. Meanwhile, Bane from our universe watches the chaos unfold. He sees the alternate Kalecgos, who appears to be totally insane, attacking both friend and foe. He also watches Goel fight the alternate Thrall, although Goel has the advantage. Bane realizes that this was because the Thrall that became Blackmoor's champion never escaped and learned shamanism, while Goel was a master shaman. Running to help him, War Chief Bane from the alternate universe intercepts and engages our Bane. As they begin fighting, Bane notices the Celestials had been just standing there doing nothing, and he became furious. Could they not see that people were dying, he thought? Were they too high above it all to help? Suddenly, Zuin opens his mouth and yells throughout the temple, "Remember the Shah! Remember the Shah!" And then Bane comes to a realization. The alternate versions of themselves were deliberately chosen by Kairos at their darkest, most broken, bellicose versions of them he could find. Kalecgos was insane. Thrall was the champion of Blackmoor. Bane was War Chief of the Horde, having presumably murdered Garrosh to avenge his dead father. He realized the Celestials not helping was the best thing they could do, as it would only add more fuel to the fire. Bane asks his War Chief counterpart if he killed Garrosh, because he killed their father, and he responds by saying he tore Hellscream apart with his own hands. War Chief Bane says that Kairos told him our Bane was defending him actually, becoming enraged and charging again. As the Celestials' aspects they represent begin encompassing the battlefield, Bane, with the wisdom of Yu'lon, shouts to the room that this is what they could have turned into. They aren't the enemy, they're themselves, and they need to accept them. Nizal's fortitude flooded into Bane, and he blocks another blow from his War Chief counterpart. War Chief Bane asks if this version of himself is a coward, and Bane tells him no, they are the same, but he chose another path. He told him he understood how he felt, wanting to kill Garrosh. Bane tells the War Chief he will not harm him, but he will defend himself. Yu'lon's wisdom helps him again, and Bane tells the War Chief that their father once believed that it was harder, but better, and the War Chief finishes his sentence, to create something that lasts. Having reached through to him, the War Chief Bane disappears. Kalecgos realizes the mad version of himself became so because he couldn't stop Jaina from destroying Orgrimmar with the tidal wave in his timeline. As a result, the Horde and the Alliance war escalated even further. The remaining blue dragons and Jaina herself perished in the ensuing chaos. Having lost everything and everyone he loved, including Anvina, the human form of the remnants of the Sunwell, he became insane. Kalecgos manages to convince his other self that all of the choices, Anvina choosing to return to the Sunwell and Jaina choosing to destroy Orgrimmar, they were not his fault. They made their own choices. The insane Kalecgos thought on this, became lucid for a moment, and more relaxed before disappearing entirely. Outside, Varian begins to fight alongside Pandaren guards against the Infinite Dragons. As one of them swoops in, he sees it breathe more of the dark sand and realizes that the dampening field is down. And in what perhaps might be the best moment in all of Warcraft lore, in my personal opinion, the following scene occurs. Varian swore the Infinite Dragonflight, he thought. My Pandaren friends, we are in trouble. At that moment, the leader dragons dove, breathing a black cloud of swirling sand. The field was down. A brutal grin twisted Varian's lips. Things just got more even, Varian said. Even? They have dragons, protested the Pandaren. And we have warlocks, Varian said. A cheer went up as several people from all different races began casting summoning spells. Fellhounds, ugly red and spiny creatures from the depths of the twisting nether, shimmered into being. Nearby, a human warlock, a woman whose young face belied her white hair, bent absently to stroke the beast, calling it a good puppy. These particular demons fed on magic, Varian recalled. He found himself grinning, and the lovely young woman who dealt so affectionately with demons gave him a wink. End quote. Dodging more mana bombs, Varian began fighting the North Sea pirates, which had jumped from the Zeppelin down to the temple below. As he continued to fight, he sustains more and more damage, and at a moment that looks like it will take his life, one of the Warlock's fell guards kills a pirate, after which the demon looks him square in the face and tells him your fate will be the same, before running off. Even though he was saved, he was still gravely injured. At this moment, he feels the comforting touch of a Night Elven priestess, who begins to heal his wounds, and when cured, he rushes back into the battle. Azala herself joins the fray, swooping down low with her dragon as she begins taunting Varian, And what does the king do? He runs as fast as he can with his injuries, jumps, grabs her ankle, and yanks her ass down off the Drake Mount to the ground. The two begin fighting, but Varian is both injured and using a two-handed sword, and is attacking slower than the dual-wielding Zayla. After he deflects one of her attacks, it looks like she's going to score a blow right in his chest, but before she can, Jaina launches a fireball from the entrance of the temple that hits her square in the midsection, sending her sprawling. As she begins casting another fireball, Shokia suddenly shoots her. The spell vanishes, she turns white, and blood soaks the front of her robes. She falls over to the ground as Zayla taunts Varian while rushing past him. Varian realizes he could catch up to her if he wanted, but he opts to try and help Jaina instead. Inside the temple, Zayla realizes that Kairos and Garrosh had successfully escaped, and she commands her dragon moth to retreat on the backs of the infinite dragons, abandoning the pirates there. Zayla, Harrow Miser, Shokia, and Thalen all manage to get away, and the remaining pirates are gathered up, imprisoned, or killed. Goel scans the battlefield and sees Agra in a corner with their son strapped to his chest. He runs over to her and finds both of them are still alright. But Varian then runs in, holding a dying Jaina in his arms. Tyrande, Goel, Anduin, and even Velen all try to heal her, but they are too weak and exhausted from the battle to do so. Kalecgos catches up to them, and he begins pleading with Jaina not to abandon him. Alliance or Horde, the courtroom grows silent as they watch Jaina Proudmoore, the legendary Archmage, slowly fade away. Varian tries to get Anduin to stop trying to heal her, as he clearly doesn't have the strength for it, but he refuses to leave. It is now that Chi-Ji, the Red Crane, speaks up. He tells them all that Anduin remembers the lesson of his own temple. Hope is what you have when all other things have failed you. When there is hope, you make room for healing, for all the things that are possible, and for some that are not. He begins flapping his wings as healing energy rains over the battlefield. Slowly, the color in Jaina's face returns, and she opens her eyes. Kalecgos embraces her, and Goel notes that for the first time in a long while, Jaina looks legitimately happy. She sees him out of the corner of her eye and reaches out a hand to him. Goel takes it for a moment, and she squeezes before letting go. Chromie walks up to the group, and Varian asks her how Kairos could have done this. Goel notices that she looks angrier and more defeated than he had ever seen her before, and she explains that the Bronze Dragonflight used to know the Timeways inside and out. Their charge, from the moment they were created, was to protect the sanctity of the timeline. But after Deathwing's defeat, they can no longer see all the timelines. They still have the power to travel the Timeways, but they've been forced to employ mortals to help with this, the Time Walkers. Chromie continues on, saying that because of this, some of the Bronze Dragon have begun believing they should use what is left of their powers to manipulate the Timeways, altering the past to change the future into something better. She sadly acknowledges that better is subjective, and because they cannot see all timelines any longer, who knows what is best? She says Kairos now is clearly one of these dragons. Tyrande asks how could the Vision of Time do this, since Chromie explained at the beginning of the trial it could only be used to see into the past or the future. Chromie says that because he created it, Kairos must have known how to bypass the safety measure. Both Goel and Varian then realize this is what Kairos was doing at the beginning of the day. He was manipulating the Vision of Time right in front of all of them. Anduin speaks up and tells them Wrathion is also in on this plan, as the room goes silent. Vol'jin breaks the news that nobody else wants to say. A bronze dragon who wants to manipulate the past is working with the last black dragon and the son of Grom Hellscream, and they don't know where or when to even begin looking for them. Goel then looks to the Celestials and wonders why they aren't more distressed at all that had happened. Taranzu, who had been fighting amidst the chaos as well, asks the Celestials to sate his curiosity and ask if they know what the verdict they would have rendered was. Nizal speaks up and says that they do, and they have known from the very beginning, stunning the entire room. Yulan says that Garrosh would live so he could continue to learn. He tells them that wisdom, fortitude, strength, and hope cannot be learned in death. Zuin says that life is not about reward and punishment, but it is about understanding, accepting oneself right now in order to change, and how. Nizal concludes, we feel that justice has been done. Tyrande is naturally not pleased. She demands what the hell was the point of having a trial in the first place if they knew at the outset what his sentence was at the end. She asks if they were toying with all of them. Yulan tells her no, but it was not merely a trial for Garrosh, and Goel speaks up, realizing what she meant, saying that they were all on trial too. Chi-Ji says Anduin and Bane realize this, but now they all understand. They all have been judged and sentenced. With all of their blessings, they can now go back out into the world and do what they must. As a group, Varian and Anduin, father and son, Kalecgos and Jaina, lovers, Tyrande and Bane, defender and accuser, standing side by side. Chromie, Lorthamar, and all the rest contemplate this. They all eventually turn toward Goel. and despite him not being in a position of leadership any longer, he spoke for all of them. We will find Garrosh. And as for our friend Garrosh, I'll let the epilogue speak for itself. Garrosh stepped out of the Timeway portal, Kairos at his side. "What do you think?" asked the bronze dragon. He looked extremely pleased with himself, as well as he might be. Garrosh didn't answer at once. He stood, feeling the soft wind caress his skin, and gazed at the rolling green hills of Nagrand. He planted his feet in the waving grass, and felt a healthy, strong earth beneath them. "This is not my home," he murmured, squinting up at the sun. "This is not my sky." "Yes and no," said Kairos. "You are home," Garrosh Hellscream, "but no, this is not the sky that you grew up with." A herd of Clefthoof thundered past, not too far in the distance. Strong, glossy-coated beasts. This was where his people were born. He saw the same earth, the same sky that his father had had. This was the gift of the bronze dragon. A world that was no more, but that could become anything. "Hellscream!" shouted a rough, orcish voice. Garrosh stared at the sound of his name, thinking that somehow his allies must have followed him and Kairos. "Who?" he began, but Kairos, his smirk more mischievous than ever, simply pointed. Utterly confused, Garrosh turned his head. The call was for another Hellscream. Standing atop a hill, wind blowing through his black hair, and sun gleaming on his muscular brown body, a fierce tattooed orc whose blood ran in Garrosh's veins replied to the greeting with an ear-splitting cry and raised gore howl. And so ends the book War Crimes. Thank you for listening, everybody. This ends the synopsis of War Crimes, and next time you are going to hear my actual review of the book. Just a little speaking off the cuff here, for those of you who might be concerned that I've revealed too much in the book, I actually left out quite a lot of things. The interactions between Varisa and Sylvanas, for example, I pretty much left out 95% of it. I just explained the important bits. As well as the trial, there is a lot of intermingling between the faction leaders that I just didn't include. So if anyone's listening to this from like a legal perspective, I think I'm in the clear still with the synopsis, even though it was quite long. But for fans, I still strongly suggest that you get the book and read it. It is fantastic. As you're going to hear in my review next time, which should be out like either tomorrow or in a couple days, I think this actually is my new favorite World of Warcraft book, which, knowing me and people who listen to me lately, I've been pretty down on Warcraft. This got me excited for Warlords of Draenor, which is kind of a tall order, because I am not exactly happy with the expansion, but nonetheless, you should get the book for yourself and read it. It is definitely worth it. Even with my synopsis, I even read all of the spoilers before I got the book, and I still went and bought it and read it, because I wanted to see for myself the full context. And like I tweeted to Christie Golden, who retweeted me, context in this book matters. There might be some things you heard me bring up that wouldn't make necessarily sense to you, but that's just a matter of me cutting out things from the script so that the video wouldn't be longer than it actually is, which is already obscenely long. So go get the book, go read it yourself, and stay tuned tomorrow for the actual review of War Crimes, where I will cover the lore implications. I'll start out covering the lore implications of the book and what that means, specifically about the Infinite Dragonflight, because we learned quite a lot. I didn't actually tell you a lot, but I'll explain more. It's also another reason to go read the book for yourself, but I'll explain more tomorrow. I'll start out with the lore implications, then get to my dislikes, and then my likes, and my final review. So stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching, everyone. My name is Necroxis, and yeah, I'll see you tomorrow.